Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Appalachian Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The Harlan County Historical Society maintains a curious collection of documents that few researchers have ever fully examined. Most of these papers remained sealed in a humid basement until 1968, when a graduate student named Thomas Whelan stumbled upon them while researching Appalachian mining communities. What he uncovered would forever change his understanding of these ancient mountains and the secrets they keep. In the winter of 1943, 7 families vanished from a small coal mining settlement nestled deep in the hollows of eastern Kentucky. Their disappearance might have gone unnoticed by the outside world, happening as it did during the chaos of World War II, were it not for a single detail that puzzled authorities. Every home was left precisely as if the occupants had just stepped out. Coffee pots still warm on stoves, half-eaten meals at kitchen tables, beds made with military precision. The only living things remaining were livestock, well-fed, and tended to just hours before the families seemingly walked away from their lives. The local sheriff, a man named Howard Tanner, who had served the county for over 20 years, filed a brief report concluding that the families had likely relocated for work in the war industries. "Times are hard," he wrote, "and the mine ain't producing like it used to. Folks, go where the money is." The case was closed within weeks. But something wasn't right about the official explanation, not according to Eleanor Blackburn, the postmistress who served that community for over 30 years. "They wouldn't leave without saying goodbye," she told a local newspaper reporter in 1944, "and they certainly wouldn't leave without collecting their mail." Raymond Jenkins had been expecting an important letter about his son overseas. He came to check his box every single day for 3 weeks straight. Then, one day, he just stopped coming. All of them just stopped. Eleanor Blackburn was known throughout the county as a sharp-minded woman who kept meticulous records. Her testimony carried weight among those who knew her, but the outside world, distracted by the daily reports of casualties from Europe and the Pacific, paid little attention to the fate of 7 families in a remote Appalachian hollow. "The sheriff didn't even go up there himself," Eleanor confided to her niece in a letter dated March 1944. "Sent his deputy instead. Young fellow, hasn't been here more than a year. Wouldn't know what questions to ask or what things might be out of place. And he was only there for less than an hour. Hardly enough time to check all those houses properly." The settlement, known locally as Crow Hollow, was mostly forgotten after the disappearance. The mines had been tapped out years earlier, and with coal no longer flowing, the company town lost its reason to exist. The remaining residents moved away within months, leaving the hollow to return to wilderness. Records from the coal company, Cumberland Mining and Development, show that operations at the Crow Hollow site had become increasingly unprofitable in the years leading up to 1943. A company memo dated June 1942 noted, "Extraction costs exceed profit margins by approximately 23%. Recommendation to cease operations by end of fiscal year." Yet inexplicably, the company continued to maintain a minimal workforce at the site until the disappearances occurred. More curious still was the company's reaction to the event. No formal inquiry was launched. No compensation was offered to any potential relatives of the missing workers. The entire incident was addressed in a single paragraph in the company's annual report. Operations at Site 23 Crow Hollow discontinued due to workforce relocation, assets written off as total loss. For decades, the mystery of the vanished families remained nothing more than a footnote in county records and an occasional story told by old-timers. That changed in the autumn of 1968 when a young hunter named Samuel McCreary ventured deeper into the mountains than most locals dared to go. McCreary was tracking a 12-point buck through unfamiliar territory when he discovered what appeared to be the remains of an old logging road, long since reclaimed by the forest. Curiosity led him to follow its winding path until he came across a small clearing. There, partially hidden by 25 years of forest growth, stood a cabin unlike any he had seen in the region. McCreary later recalled his first impression of the structure. It didn't look right sitting there, not like something that was built, more like something that had grown up from the ground. The proportions were all wrong, door too tall and narrow, windows too high. Made you feel small just looking at it. The structure was built with unusual precision, its logs fitted so tightly that barely a sliver of light penetrated the walls. But it was what McCreary found inside that would eventually reach the desk of the state police, a collection of carefully preserved personal effects that matched descriptions of items belonging to the families who had vanished from Crow Hollow. I remember walking through that door and feeling like something was watching me, McCreary later testified. Not something living, mind you, something waiting. The air inside was different, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. The cabin contained no bodies, no signs of violence, nothing to immediately suggest foul play. Just meticulously arranged personal belongings, wedding rings, pocket watches, family photographs, all displayed with an unsettling deliberateness on rough-hewn shelves built into the walls. Each item was labeled with a name, names that would later be confirmed as belonging to residents of Crow Hollow. McCreary described the interior as museum-like, with items grouped by family and individual. It wasn't ransacked or piled up like you'd expect if someone had robbed these people. Everything was placed just so, like exhibits. There was even a little card next to each thing, written in this real careful handwriting, with the person's name and what looked like dates. What disturbed McCreary most was the precise arrangement of the items. Everything was exactly the same distance apart. I mean exactly. I checked with my hunting knife, 3 inches between each item, no matter how big or small, and they were all clean, like they'd been polished regular, no dust, not even a spider web, in a cabin that hadn't seen people in who knows how long. State police investigators arrived the following day, but a sudden early snowstorm forced them to abandon the site before a thorough search could be conducted. By the time weather permitted their return 3 weeks later, the cabin had burned to the ground. The official report cited probable arson, though no suspects were ever identified. Detective Alan Prescott, who led the initial investigation, noted several troubling inconsistencies in his personal journal. The fire appears to have burned at an unusually high temperature, he wrote. Forest Service experts indicate temperatures may have reached 3,000 degrees, far exceeding what a typical structure fire would produce. The surrounding area shows an unusual burn pattern, with the intensity decreasing in perfect concentric circles from the cabin outward. No accelerants were detected, and the snowfall should have dampened any natural spread. This was no ordinary fire. The mystery might have ended there if not for a discovery made during the excavation of the cabin ruins. Beneath the floorboards, investigators recovered a metal lockbox containing a journal. The handwriting inside was identified as belonging to Raymond Jenkins, one of the missing residents of Crow Hollow. The lockbox itself presented a puzzle. Metallurgists at the University of Kentucky examined it and determined that while it appeared to be simple steel, it had withstood temperatures that should have melted it completely. The material composition defies conventional analysis, their report stated. It bears some similarities to steel alloys used in aerospace applications, but with molecular structures we cannot readily identify with current technology. The journal's entries began in October 1942, approximately 3 months before the disappearances. Initially, they detailed mundane aspects of daily life, mining quotas, community events, weather conditions. But by early November, the entries took a darker turn. October 3, 1942, the company sent another inspector today. Third one this month. Claims they're monitoring air quality, but they only take readings after dark. Mason says they're looking for a new coal seam. But why not tell us if that's the case? We're the ones doing the digging. October 17, 1942. Strange sounds from the new shaft last night. Not cave-ins or settling, more like whispers. Foreman says it's just air moving through the tunnels, but we've all worked these mines long enough to know the difference. Williams refused to go back down this morning. Can't say I blame him. November 9th, 1942. Elias Norton claims he saw someone watching from the tree line last night. Says it was too tall to be a man. Norton's prone to exaggeration after a few drinks, but he hasn't touched a drop since his brother was crushed in the collapse last spring. The others laughed it off. I'm not so sure. November 16th, 1942. More reports of watching eyes. Martha Williams swears someone was standing outside her kitchen window for nearly an hour last night. Just standing there, not moving. By the time her husband checked, there was nothing there. But the ground outside showed no footprints despite the mud. November 23, 1942. Sullivan hasn't spoken a word in 3 days. Dr. Peyton says it's just shock from his father's passing, but there's something in his eyes that makes my skin crawl. He sits at their window from sunup to sundown, staring at the eastern ridge. When his wife tries to move him, he becomes hysterical. The only word he's said is coming. Jenkins' entries grow increasingly erratic as December progresses. His normally neat handwriting becomes jagged and hurried. December 2nd, 1942, company men brought in some kind of equipment yesterday, set it up near the mouth of the new shaft. Won't tell us what it's for. Makes a low humming noise all night. Dogs won't stop barking. Nobody's sleeping well. December 7th, 1942, Pearl Harbor anniversary. Radio full of war news. But that's not what has people talking. 3 separate households reported items missing today. Nothing valuable. Martha's grandmother's hairbrush, old Cooper's tobacco pouch he's carried for 20 years, Sullivan's fountain pen that was a wedding gift. Like someone's collecting souvenirs. December 10th, 1942. Found strange markings on our doors this morning. Everyone did. Not paint or chalk. Something darker. Won't wash off. Symbols I've never seen before. Sent a telegram to the sheriff. No response yet. December 15th, 1942. Something's in the woods. It's not just watching anymore. It's calling. God help me. But some nights I want to answer. The entries continue with increasing urgency until December 20th, when Jenkins wrote, "They're here. They know our names." This final entry showed subtle differences in penmanship that handwriting experts could not fully explain. The pressure applied to the page was significantly greater, with ink soaking through to several pages beneath. Under microscopic examination, the ink in this entry contained trace elements not present in previous entries, including unusual organic compounds that defied conventional analysis. The journal was submitted to various handwriting experts who confirmed it was indeed written by Jenkins, until the final entry. Dr. Miriam Holden, a forensic document examiner with the FBI, noted, while superficially similar to the subject's established handwriting pattern, the final entry exhibits significant deviations in stroke formation, letter spacing, and pressure dynamics. In my professional opinion, this entry was written by someone attempting to mimic Jenkins's handwriting and not entirely succeeding. When asked to speculate on who might have written the final entry, Dr. Holden declined to offer theories, stating only that the physiological parameters suggested by the handwriting sample would be unusual. The case remained dormant until 1952, when a University of Kentucky anthropology professor named Margaret Holcomb began researching Appalachian folklore for her doctoral dissertation. During interviews with elderly residents throughout Harlan County, she noticed recurring mentions of what locals called the quiet people, tall, silent figures said to inhabit the deepest parts of the mountains. These weren't your typical ghost stories, Holcomb noted in her unpublished manuscript. The consistency across isolated communities was remarkable. Individuals with no contact with one another described nearly identical encounters. The figures were always described as unnaturally tall, thin, and patient. They never spoke but were said to stand at the edges of clearings or just beyond the reach of porch lights, watching for hours or even days. Holcomb documented more than 60 separate accounts of encounters with these entities, spanning from the early 1800s to the 1950s. The descriptions remained remarkably consistent across generations and geographic areas, with witnesses separated by both time and distance reporting identical details. "What struck me most," she wrote, "was the emotional response these sightings evoked. Not terror or panic, as one might expect, but a profound melancholy. Witnesses repeatedly described feeling an overwhelming sense of loss after these encounters, as if something precious had been taken from them. Many reported persistent dreams of walking into the forest, drawn by an irresistible longing for something they couldn't name." Most academic reviewers dismissed Holcomb's work as a collection of superstitions from an isolated, uneducated population. Her dissertation was rejected. Her academic career effectively ended. She left Kentucky shortly thereafter, but not before depositing her research notes with the County Historical Society. Among those notes was a transcript of a 1951 interview with Abigail Thornton, a 93-year-old resident of a neighboring hollow who claimed her grandmother had encountered the quiet people in the 1870s. "Gran said they've been here long before us," Thornton told Holcomb, "said they was here when the first settlers came over the mountains, said they don't want the land or nothing on it, they just want the people, not all people. Just them that can hear them calling." When asked to elaborate, Thornton reportedly lowered her voice to a whisper. "They collect them, like some folks collect arrowheads or pretty rocks. They take them whole and living and keep them somewhere up in the mountains, keep them like treasures." Thornton went on to describe her grandmother's encounter in unsettling detail. "Gran said she was picking berries up on Maiden Ridge when she felt someone watching her. Turned around and there was one of them standing between two trees. Said it was tall as the first branches, thin as a sapling. Had a face like a person, but not quite right, eyes too big, mouth too small. It just stood there, watching her. Said she couldn't move, couldn't even call out. Then it raised one long hand and pointed at her wedding ring. Said she knew right then it was deciding whether to take her or not." Holcomb's notes include a curious addendum to this interview. Mrs. Thornton would not continue the conversation after sunset. "When I arrived the following morning to resume our discussion, her daughter informed me she had passed away during the night. The daughter was visibly distraught, claiming her mother had been in excellent health and had spent her final evening staring out the window at the tree line, refusing to draw the curtains despite the daughter's insistence. An autopsy performed on Thornton revealed no clear cause of death. The county coroner listed natural causes on the death certificate, though his private notes, discovered decades later, mentioned unusual tissue desiccation inconsistent with normal post-mortem changes. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, there were sporadic reports of hikers and hunters encountering unusually tall, silent figures in the most remote regions of the Appalachian Mountains. None of these reports were formally investigated, and most were attributed to misidentifications of bears standing on hind legs or the psychological effects of isolation in the dense forest. In 1958, a U.S. Geological Survey team working in the area documented an unusual phenomenon that may be relevant to the Crow Hollow mystery. While charting underground water sources, their equipment detected what they termed acoustic anomalies emanating from deep within the mountain range. According to their report, at depths exceeding 300 feet, audio sensors recorded rhythmic vibrations unlike typical geological sounds. The pattern suggests intelligent origin rather than natural processes. Frequencies oscillated in a manner consistent with vocalization, though well below the range of human speech. When played back at accelerated speeds, these recordings produced sounds that multiple team members independently described as whispering voices. The project lead, Dr. James Whitaker, ordered all recordings sealed and classified them as equipment malfunctions in the official report. In his private correspondence, however, Whitaker expressed deep unease about what they had discovered. In a letter to a colleague at MIT, he wrote, "There's something down there, Richard, something that shouldn't be. The mathematical precision of these sound patterns defies natural explanation. We're picking up what can only be described as conversations, but from speakers who are most definitely not human. The survey was abruptly terminated 2 weeks ahead of schedule when 3 team members reported vivid auditory hallucinations and requested immediate evacuation from the site. All 3 men later resigned from the USGS and reportedly refused to discuss their experiences, even decades later. In 1967, another geological survey team mapping coal seams in eastern Kentucky reported a similar acoustic phenomenon. Their equipment detected what they described as whispered conversations emanating from deep within the mountain, despite being in an area with no known cave systems or hollow spaces that might create such echoes. The team's report notes, the sounds were initially attributed to equipment malfunction. Most disturbing was the distinct impression of multiple voices speaking in unison, as if reciting something from memory. Spectral analysis of these recordings, declassified in 1989, revealed frequency patterns consistent with human speech, but organized in mathematical sequences that linguists described as impossibly complex and following rules of syntax that have no parallel in any known human language. The survey team abandoned their work 2 days later when their lead geologist, Dr. However, when recordings were analyzed, what appeared to be coherent speech patterns were identified, though in no recognizable language. William Harrison disappeared during a routine soil collection. An extensive search found no trace of Harrison. His disappearance was officially attributed to a fall from one of the numerous cliff faces in the area, though his body was never recovered. Harrison's final journal entry, made the evening before his disappearance, contains a troubling observation. The equipment keeps picking up those damn whispers, stronger every day. But this morning, for the first time, I heard them without the equipment. They're speaking English now. They know my name. They know where I sleep. They know what I dream. It was in this context that Samuel McCreary's discovery in 1968 briefly reignited interest in the long-forgotten residents of Crow Hollow. State Police Detective Alan Prescott led the initial investigation into the cabin McCreary had found. In his personal notes, later donated to the Historical Society, Prescott expressed profound unease about what they'd discovered. The arrangement of the items troubles me more than anything else, he wrote. They weren't stored or discarded. They were displayed like exhibits in a museum. Each item placed at precisely the same distance from the next, each labeled not just with a name, but with dates of birth, and what I can only assume are dates of collection. If these are indeed trophies, what became of the people they were taken from? Prescott's notes describe a disturbing precision to the cabin's construction and contents. The dimensions of the structure defy conventional carpentry. Every measurement is a precise multiple of 7 inches, an unusual standard that serves no practical purpose. The ceiling height of 91 inches would make the space uncomfortable for someone of average height. The doorway, at 84 inches tall, but only 14 inches wide, would be virtually impassable for a normal-sized adult. Most unsettling was Prescott's description of the display shelves. Each shelf contains exactly 7 items. Each item is positioned exactly 3 inches from adjacent items, measured from center to center. The items themselves appear ordinary. Wedding rings, watches, eyeglasses, pipes, brushes, small articles of clothing like gloves or scarves, but all show an unusual condition. They appear worn but pristine, as if aged by use, but preserved at the exact moment they were last touched by their owners. Prescott's investigation was cut short when jurisdiction was unexpectedly transferred to federal authorities. No explanation was provided for this change, and subsequent requests for information under nascent Freedom of Information procedures were denied, citing national security concerns, an unusual justification for what appeared to be a simple missing persons case, albeit an old one. In a private letter to his brother, Prescott expressed frustration with the abrupt termination of his investigation. They came in without warning, 4 men in identical gray suits, No proper identification, just a letter signed by someone I've never heard of at the Department of Defense. Ordered us to pack up and clear out within the hour. Confiscated all our photographs, all our evidence logs. Said it was now a matter of national security. What possible threat to national security could be hiding in those mountains? Prescott was reassigned to traffic duty the following week. His personnel file, obtained decades later through a Freedom of Information Act request, contains a psychiatric evaluation ordering his removal from investigative work due to persistent delusions and paranoid ideation. Prescott resigned from the force 3 months later and moved to Oregon, where he reportedly refused to discuss the Crow Hollow case for the remainder of his life. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the lack of resolution. Federal authorities never released their findings, if any existed. The site of the cabin was declared off-limits due to environmental concern, and a series of unusually severe landslides in the spring of 1969 rendered the area all but inaccessible. Aerial surveys conducted in the 1970s show that the topography of the region changed dramatically after these landslides, with the specific area where the cabin stood appearing to have subsided into what geologists termed a slump feature, essentially a depression caused by the collapse of underground spaces. No explanation was offered for why such extensive subterranean voids would exist in a region with no known cave systems. Thomas Whelan, the graduate student who initially uncovered the historical documentation of the Crow Hollow disappearances, attempted to follow up on the case after completing his studies. His correspondence with various government agencies, preserved in the Historical Society's archives, reveals an increasingly frustrated young man facing institutional stonewalling at every turn. His letters show a gradual shift from academic curiosity to obsession. In early communications, he maintains a scholarly tone, requesting access to records and interviews with officials. By mid-1969, his language becomes more urgent, with multiple references to being watched and followed. In a letter to his former academic advisor dated August 1969, Whelan wrote, "I'm convinced there's a coordinated effort to suppress this information. 3 separate archives have now told me their records of the incident are missing. 2 potential witnesses have canceled interviews at the last minute, offering identical excuses word for word. Yesterday I found boot prints in the soil beneath my kitchen window. Someone is monitoring my investigation." His final letter, dated October 12, 1969, was addressed to his academic advisor. "Something doesn't want this story told. I've exhausted every official channel and hit nothing but dead ends. Tomorrow I'm heading back to the mountains." McCreary has agreed to show me where he found the cabin. I know the official line is that the area is unsafe, but I need to see it for myself. If I'm not back by Friday, you'll know where to start looking. Whelan never returned from that expedition. McCreary, when questioned, claimed Whelan had never arrived for their arranged meeting. A search was organized, but yielded no results. Whelan's disappearance was officially attributed to misadventure in the notoriously dangerous terrain of the eastern Kentucky mountains. Curiously, Whelan's apartment was found in immaculate condition after his disappearance. His research materials were neatly organized, his clothing freshly laundered and precisely folded. The only item out of place was his journal, open on his desk to a blank page with a single sentence written at the top, "I can hear them calling my name." Handwriting analysis confirmed this entry was in Whelan's hand, but written with unusual pressure and spacing consistent with extreme duress. More troubling still, forensic examination revealed the ink used for this final entry contained trace elements not present in any of Whelan's other writings, the same unidentified compounds found in the final entry of Raymond Jenkins's journal recovered from the cabin 25 years earlier. In 1975, a team from the Smithsonian Institution investigating Appalachian folk beliefs conducted several interviews with residents of communities neighboring the now abandoned Crow Hollow. These interviews, recorded on magnetic tape and later transcribed, contain numerous references to the collection. One interview subject, an elderly man identified only as J.D., told researchers, "They've been collecting for longer than anybody knows. Ain't just people they take. It's pieces of people. Things that make us what we are. Things we touch and hold and keep close. They study those things, learn from them. And when they learn enough about someone, that's when they come for them." When asked who they were, the man reportedly fell silent for several minutes before responding, "Ain't got no name for them, not one that's safe to say out loud. But they've been in these hills since before the hills had names, and they'll be here long after we're gone." The researchers noted that similar accounts were repeated throughout the region, always with the same curious reluctance to directly name or describe the entities involved. The project's lead anthropologist noted this pattern of deliberate vagueness was inconsistent with typical folklore transmission, which tends to become more detailed and elaborate over time, not less. "It's as if," she wrote, "the entire community is engaged in a form of deliberate forgetting, sharing only enough of the story to serve as a warning while consciously avoiding details that might make the threat too real or too attractive." Another recurring theme in these interviews was the concept of being called. Multiple subjects referenced the idea that the entities in the mountains could somehow communicate directly into a person's mind, creating an irresistible urge to venture into the wilderness. "They don't take just anybody," explained an 83-year-old woman identified as E.M. in the transcripts. "They choose careful like, watch folks for years sometimes, learn everything about them, and once they decide they want someone, they start calling. Might be just dreams at first. Dreams of walking into the trees, dreams of finding something you lost long ago, but the dreams get stronger, and one day you just start walking. Some part of you knows you shouldn't go, but by then it's too late. You belong to the collection." When researchers asked if anyone had ever resisted this calling, the responses were uniformly negative. "Once they set their mind on having you," said one elderly man, "ain't no power on earth can stop it. Best you can hope for is they decide you ain't worth collecting." By the early 1960s, much of the area surrounding Crow Hollow had been incorporated into federal forest land, with access increasingly restricted due to what officials described as unstable geological conditions. Satellite imagery from 1967, declassified in the late 1980s, shows a curious pattern of vegetation around the former settlement. A perfect circle of forest approximately 1 mile in diameter, where the trees appear to be growing at an accelerated rate compared to the surrounding woodland. Botanical samples collected from this area in the early 1970s showed unusual characteristics. The trees, while appearing externally normal, contained cellular structures that botanists described as novel and evolutionarily improbable. Genetic analysis, limited by the technology of the time, suggested these plants had somehow incorporated non-plant DNA sequences of unknown origin. In 1981, during routine timber surveys, Forestry Service employees reported an unusual silence in this region. Audio recordings made during these surveys capture the abrupt cessation of all wildlife sounds. No birds, insects, or other ambient forest noise when entering this circle. The phenomenon was documented, but never explained. One forestry worker, in an unofficial report, described the experience. "It's like walking into a photograph. Everything looks alive, but nothing moves. No squirrels, no birds, not even ants on the ground. The trees don't sway, even when the wind is blowing everywhere else. And the silence. It's not just quiet. It's like sound itself can't exist there. You can shout, and your voice seems to die inches from your mouth." This same worker reported discovering unusual formations in the forest. Trees growing in perfect geometric patterns, circles, triangles, more complex shapes I couldn't even name, not natural growth patterns. And at the center of each formation, the ground was different, disturbed somehow but not by digging, more like it had been rearranged at a molecular level. The worker requested a transfer the following day and reportedly sought psychiatric treatment for persistent nightmares. His report was filed but never officially acknowledged or investigated. The most recent development in this long-dormant mystery occurred in the spring of 1967, when a hiker discovered what appeared to be human remains in a remote cave system approximately 12 miles from the site of the former Crow Hollow settlement. Carbon dating suggested the remains were contemporary with the 1943 disappearances. Most unsettling was the condition of the remains. The bones showed no signs of trauma or violence, yet they were arranged in a manner inconsistent with either traditional burial practices or natural decomposition. The skeleton had been carefully disarticulated, each bone placed precisely 2 inches from the next, forming a pattern that forensic anthropologists described as ritualistic but without precedent in known funerary practices. Dr. Elaine Harper, the forensic anthropologist who examined the remains, noted several disturbing anomalies in her report. The bones appear to have been cleaned not by natural decomposition, but by some unknown process that removed all organic material while leaving the mineral structure intact. More troubling is the evidence of microscopic tool marks on every bone surface, consistent with repeated methodical examination over a prolonged period. These marks suggest the remains were subjected to something akin to scientific study, but with instruments unlike any used in conventional osteological research. Most puzzling were the chemical changes to the bone tissue itself. The calcium phosphate matrix shows evidence of partial replacement with an unidentified crystalline compound, Dr. Harper wrote. This transformation appears deliberate and controlled, rather than environmental in nature, with the new material propagating through the existing bone structure in mathematically precise patterns. In effect, the bones were being slowly converted into something else entirely, a process I cannot explain with current scientific understanding. The identity of the remains has never been conclusively established. DNA testing was attempted but yielded inconclusive results due to unusual degradation of genetic material that specialists could not readily explain. The case file remains open but inactive. Today, the area where Crow Hollow once stood is overgrown and nearly impossible to locate without precise coordinates. Local guides refuse to lead visitors to the site, citing dangerous terrain. Those few who have ventured there independently report an oppressive atmosphere and the unsettling sense of being observed from just beyond the tree line. In 1992, a documentary filmmaker named Jason Merritt attempted to reach the site with a small crew. Their abandoned equipment was found 3 days later, the camera containing only static-filled footage and audio recordings of what sound technicians described as layered whispers speaking in unison. Merritt and his 3-person crew were never found, despite an extensive search operation involving state police, Forest Service personnel, and local volunteers. The only potentially useful evidence was a digital audio recorder belonging to Merritt's sound engineer. Most of the content was corrupted, but a partial recovery yielded a disturbing final recording. In it, Merritt can be heard saying, "Something's following us, been pacing us since dawn." Davis thinks the recording cuts to static for 17 seconds before clearing momentarily to capture a single whispered phrase in what analysts identified as Merritt's voice. Though dramatically altered, they're adding us to the collection. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case is how thoroughly it has been forgotten or deliberately ignored by authorities and academics alike. Attempts to resurrect the investigation have met with institutional indifference or active obstruction. Grant proposals to fund archaeological studies of the area are routinely rejected without explanation. Academic papers addressing the disappearances struggle to find publishers. Dr. Rebecca Landers, a folklore specialist who attempted to compile a comprehensive study of the Crow Hollow incident in 2001, described a pattern of subtle interference with her research. Source materials would go missing between visits to archives. Interview subjects would agree to speak with me, then call to cancel, often using identical phrasing. On 3 separate occasions, I arrived at a library to find the specific documents I needed had been checked out that morning. All was by someone whose name was later found to be fictitious. More troubling were Dr. Landers's experiences during her field research in eastern Kentucky. I began finding small personal items rearranged in my hotel room. Nothing missing, just moved slightly. My hairbrush would be on the opposite side of the sink. My wedding ring would be turned upside down if I left it on the nightstand. Twice I found my clothing folded in patterns I know I didn't create. After 3 months of research, Dr. Landers abandoned the project following what she described as a direct warning. In her final journal entry before returning to her university position, she wrote, "Found a page torn from my own notebook on my pillow tonight. A page I know I didn't remove." On it, in handwriting identical to my own, but which I have no memory of writing, were the words, "Some collections are not meant to be disturbed. Go home, Rebecca, while you still can." It's as if some unseen force has determined that the story of Crow Hollow and its vanished residents should remain untold. And perhaps that is the true horror of this case, not what happened to those 7 families on a winter night in 1943, but how completely their disappearance has been erased from collective memory. One final note bears mentioning. In 1991, a routine inventory of the Harlan County Historical Society's archives revealed that Thomas Whelan's original research materials, Raymond Jenkins's journal, and Margaret Holcomb's interview transcripts had all vanished without explanation. The only remaining evidence of their existence is a catalog entry and a single photograph showing Jenkins's final journal entry. The photograph shows a page with a single line of text. "They're here. They know our names." Below this line, barely visible in the margin of the page, is a small notation in different handwriting. The collection grows. The quiet continues. Curiously, 3 different handwriting experts who examined this photograph reached the same unsettling conclusion. The marginal note appears to have been written by Thomas Whelan 26 years after his disappearance. This detail was never included in any official report. The expert who made the initial identification reportedly resigned from her position the following day and moved to Australia, where she refused all further contact with colleagues or former associates. Those who venture into the deepest hollows of eastern Kentucky today occasionally report glimpsing unusually tall figures standing motionless among distant trees. Local residents advise visitors not to look too long or too hard at such sightings. Some things, they say, aren't meant to be seen clearly. Some things notice when you notice them. A forest ranger who has worked the region for over 30 years and requested anonymity shared this observation. "I've spent my life in these mountains, know every trail, every creek, but there are places I won't go, places where the compass needle spins and GPS signals die, places where you feel eyes on you from every direction. I've seen things in those deep hollows that don't make sense. Shadows that move against the light, trees that shouldn't be able to grow in those formations. And I've heard things too. Voices calling my name when I'm miles from anywhere. Always at dusk, always from just beyond where I can see." He paused before adding, "There was an incident back in '83. 4 hikers went missing in the area where Crow Hollow used to be. Search and rescue operation found nothing. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing. 6 months later, all their personal belongings, watches, wallets, eyeglasses, wedding rings, turned up arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of a Forest Service road 50 miles away. Each item was exactly 3 inches from the next, each one clean and polished like it was brand new." When asked if the incident was reported, the ranger laughed without humor. "Reported? Sure. And the next day my supervisor told me I was being transferred to Wyoming. The report disappeared from the files. The evidence photos vanished from the lab. And when I called the families to follow up, every single one of them denied their relatives had ever been hiking in Kentucky. And in those ancient mountains, where the silence can press against your ears like a physical force, perhaps there is wisdom in looking away. Perhaps there is safety in forgetting. Perhaps the residents of Crow Hollow are better left uncounted among the missing. For in the dense forests of Appalachia, where the mist clings to mountainsides like reluctant ghosts, there are places where the boundary between collector and collection becomes troublingly thin, places where being remembered might be more dangerous than being forgotten. In 2005, a linguistic anthropologist named Dr. Michael Chen discovered an unusual language pattern in historical accounts of encounters with the quiet people of the Appalachian forests. Analyzing hundreds of testimonies spanning over 2 centuries, he identified what he called recursive omissions, specific details that witnesses seemed systematically unable to articulate. It's not simply that they wouldn't describe certain aspects of their experiences, Dr. Chen wrote in a paper that was rejected by 14 academic journals before being self-published online. It's that the language itself breaks down when they attempt to do so. Their syntax becomes circular, their descriptions self-contradicting. It's as if human language lacks the structures necessary to accurately convey what they encountered. Most intriguing was Dr. Chen's analysis of the geographical distribution of these accounts. When mapped against topographical features, the encounters clustered along what he termed narrative fault lines, borders between areas with differing folk traditions. These aren't random distributions, he noted. They follow patterns consistent with territorial behavior, specifically the marking of boundaries. Dr. Chen's research came to an abrupt end in January 2006, when he canceled all classes mid-semester and reportedly moved to an undisclosed location. His final email to a colleague read simply, "They don't want us to have words for them, but they're learning our words for us." The Harlan County Historical Society maintains a restricted section in its archives. Access requires special permission and is rarely granted. Those who have seen the contents speak of a single box containing nothing but a folded topographic map. On this map, Crow Hollow and several other small settlements have been marked with the same notation, reserved for the collection. The map bears a federal seal and a classification date of December 21, 1943, one day after the final entry in Raymond Jenkins's journal. In 2010, a geology graduate student conducting field research in the region discovered an anomaly in soil samples collected near the former site of Crow Hollow. The samples contained microscopic crystalline structures that, under electron microscope examination, revealed what appeared to be engineered rather than naturally formed. "These aren't normal crystal formations," the student wrote in notes that were later removed from university records. "They display a level of structural complexity that suggests intentional design." More disturbing is their apparent function. They seem configured to resonance at frequencies that correspond to human neural activity, almost like some kind of receiver. Further analysis revealed these crystalline structures were present throughout the region, but concentrated in certain areas, particularly those associated with historical disappearances. More troubling still was their distribution pattern in soil layers, which suggested they had been present in the ecosystem for at least several centuries, gradually increasing in concentration. The student's faculty advisor terminated the research project after reviewing these findings, citing methodological concerns. All samples were confiscated, and the student was reassigned to a different research area. 3 months later, the student withdrew from the graduate program and, according to former classmates, moved to Alaska to work as a fishing guide, refusing all contact with former academic associates. As of this recording, no further investigation into the disappearances has been authorized. The forest has reclaimed Crow Hollow so completely that its precise location can no longer be determined from available records. The families who vanished there have no living relatives to advocate for them. Their names exist only in dusty county records and on the carefully preserved items in a cabin that burned to ashes over 50 years ago. But somewhere in those mountains, if local whispers are to be believed, the collection remains intact, growing, waiting, and perhaps, in some manner we cannot comprehend, watching. In 2013, a hiker reported finding an unusual structure deep in the forest, approximately 15 miles from the presumed location of the original cabin discovered by McCreary. The hiker described a building that didn't look right, too tall, too narrow, with windows placed too high for any normal person to see out of. By the time forest rangers investigated the report 3 days later, no structure could be found at the coordinates provided. The hiker himself seemed to have no memory of making the report when contacted for follow-up. "Must have been someone using my name," he insisted. "I've never hiked in that area. Have no intention to either. Something about those ridges just feel wrong." Rangers noted that the man appeared physically unharmed but unusually distressed. During their conversation, he repeatedly touched various personal items, his watch, his wedding ring, a pendant around his neck, as if reassuring himself they were still there. When questioned about this behavior, he had no explanation, but seemed unable to stop. 3 weeks later, the man resigned from his job, sold his house, and moved out of state, leaving no forwarding address. His family reported receiving a single postcard with no message, just a precisely drawn circle containing 7 evenly spaced dots. For those traveling through the remote hollows of eastern Kentucky, locals still offer the same advice they've given for generations. Don't linger after sunset. Don't look too long at the tree line. And if you hear something calling your name from the deep woods, no matter how familiar the voice might sound, turn around and walk the other way. Because in Appalachia, some collections are still being curated, and the collectors, it seems, are always looking for new acquisitions. In 2015, a data analyst working for a major cellular provider noticed an unusual pattern in service interruptions throughout eastern Kentucky. The outages formed geometric patterns when mapped, perfect circles, triangles, and more complex polygons, with the former location of Crow Hollow near the center of these formations. More curious still, these service interruptions corresponded precisely with patterns of unexplained disappearances in the region over the previous decade, hikers who strayed from trails, locals who ventured into the woods alone, researchers studying various aspects of Appalachian ecology or culture. The analyst compiled his findings in a detailed report, complete with geographical coordinates and temporal correlations. His supervisor thanked him for his diligence, promised to escalate the matter to senior management, and suggested he take some accumulated vacation time. When the analyst returned 2 weeks later, he found his report had never been submitted, his data had been purged from company servers, and his position had been eliminated in a routine reorganization. His key cards no longer worked, his email account had been deactivated, and security escorted him from the building within 20 minutes of his arrival. That evening, he discovered that every electronic copy of his report had been corrupted beyond recovery. The only remaining evidence of his work was a hand-drawn map showing the pattern of outages, a map that vanished from his desk sometime during the night, while he slept. 3 days later, he began to dream of walking into the forest. A week after that, he purchased hiking equipment and a one-way ticket to Kentucky. He was never seen again. When Samuel McCreary was interviewed for this account in 1962, shortly before his death from natural causes, he added one final detail that had been omitted from his original statement to authorities. "I didn't just find personal items in that cabin," he said. "I found empty frames, dozens of them hanging on the walls, like they were waiting to be filled." When asked what he thought they were meant to hold, McCreary was silent for a long moment before responding. "Reflections, maybe. The kind that don't need mirrors to exist." He refused to elaborate further and requested that no additional questions about the cabin be directed to him. 3 weeks later, he was found at his kitchen table, apparently having passed peacefully in his sleep. The only unusual circumstance noted by the coroner was that McCreary's eyes were open, fixed on the window that faced the distant ridgeline where he had made his discovery decades earlier. The coroner also noted, though this detail was later removed from the official report, that several personal items appeared to be missing from McCreary's home: his pocket watch, his wedding ring, a fountain pen he reportedly carried for over 40 years. McCreary's daughter, when asked about these items, became visibly distressed. "Daddy was wearing his watch and ring when I saw him the evening before," she insisted. "Had the pen in his shirt pocket like always. They can't be missing. They just can't." 3 days after McCreary's funeral, his daughter called the sheriff's office to report finding the missing items. According to the deputy who responded, the watch, ring, and pen were arranged in a perfect triangle on McCreary's desk, each exactly 3 inches from the others. Each item had been polished to a high shine. The deputy's report contains a curious addendum. Mrs. Larson, McCreary's daughter, insisted she had searched the desk thoroughly multiple times, and the items had not been there. She became increasingly agitated when I suggested they might have been overlooked. Before I left, she made a statement I found concerning. "They're not his anymore. They just look like his, but they're empty now." The deputy recommended a wellness check on Mrs. Larson the following day, but when officers arrived at her home, they found it vacant. Neighbors reported seeing her loading a single suitcase into her car before dawn. She never returned to the county and was eventually declared legally deceased in 1981 after years without contact. In those ancient mountains, the silence continues to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. And for the missing residents of Crow Hollow, perhaps silence is all that remains. The final piece of this puzzle may be the most disturbing of all. In 2018, a digital archivist working to preserve the records of the Harlan County Historical Society discovered an anomaly in the catalog system. Every document related to Crow Hollow, the missing families, or subsequent investigations had been marked with a unique classification code, RT317. When the archivist inquired about this code, the Society's elderly director became visibly uncomfortable. "That's just an old cataloging system," she said. "Pay it no mind." But the archivist's curiosity was piqued. Searching other regional archives, she found the same code applied to similar documents throughout Appalachia. Always associated with disappearances, always connected to reports of watchers in the forest, always applied to records that were frequently reported missing or damaged. In the Library of Congress classification system, she discovered RT317 was an obsolete designation once used for accounts of encounters with non-human intelligences. The classification had been discontinued in 1946 for reasons not specified in library records. In her personal journal, the archivist noted, "There's a pattern here that spans centuries, not just the disappearances or the watching figures, but the systematic obscuring of information about them. It's as if something is curating not just people, but knowledge itself, collecting certain experiences while ensuring others remain forgotten." 2 months into her research, the archivist began to report unusual phenomena. Personal items rearranged in her apartment, the sensation of being watched even in locked rooms, dreams of walking into the forest toward something waiting just beyond her field of vision. Her final journal entry reads, "I understand now why the classification was discontinued. It wasn't to suppress information about them. It was because they objected to being classified at all. They are the ones who do the classifying. They are the ones who decide what belongs in which collection. And they've decided about me." The archivist disappeared 3 days later. Her apartment was found in immaculate condition, everything in perfect order, except for 3 personal items arranged in a triangle on her desk. Her grandfather's pocket watch, a silver bracelet she'd worn since childhood, and her university-class ring. Each was positioned exactly 3 inches from the others. Each had been polished to a mirror shine. On her computer, a single document remained open, a blank page containing only the words, "The collection grows. The quiet continues." In those ancient mountains where the oldest trees have witnessed centuries of human presence, something watches and waits. Something that collects not just physical objects, but the essence of what makes us who we are. Something that has learned, over countless generations, the perfect bait to draw us deeper into the silent woods. And if you find yourself in those remote hollows of eastern Kentucky and hear something calling your name in a voice that sounds achingly familiar, remember the fate of Crow Hollow. Turn around, walk away, and whatever you do, don't look back at the tree line, because some collections are still growing, and there's always room for one more carefully preserved specimen.